Harper Hayes had one very simple rule when it came to cleaning Mr. Richardson's mansion. Never touch the wedding dress in the master bedroom closet. For 6 months, she followed this rule faithfully. Every Wednesday, when it was time to dust the massive closet filled with designer suits and polished leather shoes, she avoided even glancing at the garment bag. She worked around it, pretending the dress wasn't there, even though it felt like it mocked her with its mere presence. The dress belonged to Victoria Richardson, Mr. Richardson's ex-wife. She'd left the house 6 months ago, leaving behind the elegant silk gown, a memory of a wedding that had ended in heartbreak. But today, something felt different. The house was quiet, with only the faint sound of the wind outside the enormous Greenwich estate. Mr. Richardson was supposed to be in San Francisco for 3 more days, and the rest of the staff had already gone home. Harper told herself it wouldn't hurt to look. Just once, she whispered as her trembling fingers reached for the zipper of the protective bag. She unzipped it slowly, as if she were opening a treasure chest. The dress slid out like liquid silver, smooth and gleaming in the soft light of the closet. Harper's heart pounded. She knew the designer, Stella McCartney, from magazines she used to dream over before her life took a sharp turn. She shouldn't try it on. She absolutely shouldn't. But the mirror called to her. Before she knew it, her practical, plain cleaning uniform was on the floor, and the luxurious dress was gliding over her work-worn hands and settling on her body. Harper turned to the mirror, holding her breath. The dress fit her perfectly. It hugged her curves in a way her simple uniform never did. She barely recognized herself. She looked like someone else. Someone glamorous and confident, someone who belonged in a house like this, with chandeliers and priceless art. Harper twirled, watching the silk swirl around her legs. For a brief, magical moment, she allowed herself to imagine the life she'd once dreamed of. She had wanted to be a fashion designer. She'd been accepted into the Fashion Institute of Technology, had even earned a scholarship. She'd had big plans, including an internship with Carolina Herrera. But then her mother had gotten sick, stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and everything had changed. Medical bills piled up, and Harper had dropped out of school to take care of her mom. Her dreams had vanished in the face of reality, replaced by scrubbing floors and dusting shelves. In the mirror, Harper saw a version of herself she hadn't seen in years. A version who still dreamed, who still hoped. The life she imagined came to a screeching halt when a deep, familiar voice broke through the silence. "Catherine?" Harper froze. Her heart nearly stopped as she turned toward the doorway. Standing there, looking utterly stunned, was Julian Richardson. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was supposed to be across the country. Yet there he was, staring at her with wide eyes, his expression a mix of disbelief and something else, something she couldn't quite place. "I must be dreaming," he murmured, stepping into the room. "Mr. Richardson?" "I." Harper started, but her voice failed her. What could she possibly say? Before she could explain, he crossed the room in a few long strides. His hand touched her waist gently, almost reverently, and he turned her to face him. His eyes searched hers, full of wonder and confusion. "My Catherine?" he whispered, almost to himself. And then, before she could say another word, he kissed her. The kiss started soft, tentative, like he was afraid she might disappear. Then it deepened, turning into something passionate and hungry. Harper's brain screamed at her to stop, to pull away, but her body didn't listen. Her hands slid up to his chest, her fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt. He smelled like leather and rain, a mix of warmth and mystery. She was utterly lost in the moment, lost in a kiss that didn't belong to her, but felt like it did. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were clouded with confusion. "You're different," he murmured, his fingers brushing her cheek. "Something's not right." Reality hit Harper like a bucket of cold water. She stepped back, her heart racing. "Mr. Richardson, I'm so sorry," she stammered, fumbling for the words. I wasn't. I'll pack my things right away." She reached for the zipper of the dress, desperate to get out of this mess, but his voice stopped her. "Wait," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. "Look at me." Harper froze, her hands trembling on the zipper. Slowly, she raised her eyes to meet his. She expected anger or disgust, but instead his gaze was steady, searching almost, gentle. "Why are you wearing my ex-wife's dress?" he asked. His voice was quiet but filled with meaning, as if he was asking a much bigger question. Harper could have lied. She could have made up some excuse, but something in his eyes demanded honesty. She took a shaky breath. "Because," she whispered, "sometimes I need to remember who I wanted to be before I became who I had to be." For a moment, Julian just stared at her. Then, to her surprise, he smiled, a small, sad smile. "That," he said softly, "might be the most honest thing anyone has ever said in this house." Harper felt like her chest was going to burst. She turned and fled, clutching her uniform to her chest like a shield. She ran to the staff bathroom, locked the door, and leaned against it, her heart pounding so loudly it was all she could hear. She looked in the mirror. The woman staring back at her looked like a stranger, flushed cheeks, wide eyes, lips swollen from his kiss. She quickly unzipped the dress, peeling it off and putting her uniform back on. The cotton felt rough against her skin, like a reminder of who she really was. A quiet knock on the door made her jump. "Harper," Julian's voice called softly from the other side. "Please, come out. We need to talk." Harper took a deep breath and opened the door. Julian was standing there, his jacket gone and his sleeves rolled up. His tie was loosened, and he looked human, not like the powerful CEO who owned the house. "My study," he said. "Let's talk there." Harper followed him down the grand staircase. She tried to prepare herself for what was coming. She'd imagined being fired before. She even had a plan. She'd stay on her sister's couch and look for a new job. But none of her plans included being kissed by her boss. The study was her favorite room in the house. It was filled with books, from classic novels to modern tech manuals. Julian gestured for her to sit, but instead of sitting at his big desk, he took the chair next to hers. "You're not fired," he said, cutting through her panic. "Let's start with that." Harper blinked, surprised. "I'm so sorry about the dress," she said quickly. "It was unprofessional, and I promise it won't happen again." "The dress isn't the problem," Julian said. "What you said upstairs, that's what I want to talk about. Who did you want to be, Harper?" Before life got in the way, Harper hesitated. But something about the way he looked at her made her speak. She told him about her dreams of becoming a fashion designer, about the scholarship she earned and the internship she'd been so excited about. And then she told him about her mom's illness, how the medical bills had drained every penny, how she'd had to give up everything to take care of her mom. "Dreams don't pay medical bills," she said, her voice quiet. Julian was silent for a long time, his gaze thoughtful. "And now?" he asked finally. "Is the life you're living enough?" Harper felt her throat tighten. She wanted to say yes, but the words wouldn't come. "It has to be," she whispered. Julian stood and walked to the window, looking out at the rain. "Do you know why my ex-wife left me?" he asked suddenly. Harper nodded. Everyone knew. It had been all over the news. Victoria had left him for her yoga instructor. "She told me I was always chasing the next big thing," Julian said, his voice quiet. "She said I didn't appreciate what was right in front of me. I thought she was wrong. But today, when I saw you in that dress, I realized something. I've been so busy with work that I didn't see what was right in front of me." Harper's heart pounded. "Mr. Richardson, about the kiss." "Julian," he corrected gently. "Call me Julian." He took a step closer, his eyes steady on hers. "Harper, I've been watching you for months without really seeing you. The way you put fresh flowers in my study every week, the way you organize my books by subject instead of color because it made more sense. I think I've been missing something important." Harper stood, needing to move. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Julian said with a small smile, "I'd like to take you to dinner." Not as your boss, but as me. Harper sat in her tiny apartment, staring out the window at the rain. She still couldn't believe what had happened. Julian Richardson, her boss, a billionaire, the kind of man you only read about in magazines, had asked her to dinner. Not just dinner, though. He wanted to talk about her dreams. It felt like something out of a fairy tale, not real life. Harper worked as a housekeeper in Julian's giant, fancy house. She cleaned his floors, organized his books, and ironed his shirts. That's what people like her did. People like him, they went to big meetings and fancy parties. Their lives didn't mix. But then came that strange day when Harper wore his ex-wife's wedding dress. It wasn't on purpose. The dress had been left behind in the house, and Harper had been curious. She just wanted to know what it felt like to wear something so beautiful. She hadn't expected Julian to walk in and see her. She definitely hadn't expected him to kiss her. Now, 3 days later, he'd asked her out. She couldn't stop thinking about it, replaying the moment in her head. When she told her sister Sophie about it, Sophie almost dropped her phone. "Wait, what?" Sophie shouted. "You're telling me the CEO, the Julian Richardson, kissed you while you were wearing his ex-wife's wedding dress? That's like something out of a movie." "Former wedding dress," Harper corrected. "And that's not the craziest part. He asked me to dinner." "Julian Richardson asked you on a date? The same guy whose coffee order you can recite by heart?" "Yes." Harper groaned. "And you said yes?" "Of course I said yes." "Did you Google him? Please tell me you Googled him," Sophie demanded. Harper had done more than Google him. She'd read everything about him. Julian wasn't just rich. He was a genius. He'd started Richardson Tech, a company that made software to keep people safe online. At 34, he'd been on the cover of Time magazine. He'd even married Catherine Blackwell, a woman from old money, like something out of a fairy tale. But their marriage hadn't lasted. "And the dinner's tonight," Harper admitted. "What? What are you going to wear?" Sophie asked. "I don't know," Harper groaned. "I bought a simple black dress, but it's nothing special." "Are you kidding me? You work in the house of a literal billionaire. You've seen what rich people wear. Channel that energy." "It's different," Harper said. "I watch. I don't participate." Still, when she hung up the phone, she went to her closet. There was the black dress she had bought on sale. It wasn't fancy, but it was nice enough. She spent extra time on her makeup, trying to look polished, like the people she saw at Julian's house. Her phone buzzed. A text from Julian. "Car arriving in 20 minutes. Looking forward to seeing you." When the car arrived, it wasn't the sleek black car she'd imagined. Instead, a classic Porsche pulled up and Julian stepped out. He wasn't in a suit like he usually wore. Instead, he had on dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that made his gray eyes stand out even more. "You look beautiful," he said simply, holding the car door open for her. "You look different," Harper said, unable to stop herself. Julian laughed, a warm, rich sound. "Good different? Very good different," she admitted. The drive to New Haven was easier than Harper expected. Julian asked her questions about her family, and she found herself telling him stories about her childhood in Vermont and her sister Sophie, who worked as a nurse. Julian told her about his own life, how he'd coded his first computer program when he was just 12 and how he'd worked so hard to build his company. When they arrived at a small pizza restaurant, Harper was surprised. "Pizza?" she asked. "Did you expect caviar and champagne?" Julian teased. "Well, kind of," Harper admitted. "Those places are full of people watching and judging," Julian said. "Here, we can actually talk." Inside, they sat at a small corner booth. The pizza was simple but delicious, with crispy edges and melty cheese. "Tell me about your designs," Julian said as he poured them both glasses of wine. Harper hesitated but finally pulled out her phone. She showed him pictures of dresses she designed back when she was in school. "This one's my favorite," she said, pointing to a sketch. "It's inspired by the Guggenheim Museum." Julian studied the drawing closely. "The pleating here, It does look like the Guggenheim spiral, so you're really talented, Harper. Why didn't you keep designing? Harper looked away. After my mom got sick, I had to quit school. I couldn't afford it anymore. Julian's voice softened. Reality is negotiable, he said. Trust me, I've built my life bending the rules of what's possible. Before Harper could respond, the door to the restaurant opened. A group of fancy, well-dressed people walked in, led by a woman with perfect curls and a designer dress. Harper froze. It was Catherine, Julian's ex-wife. Catherine's eyes scanned the room, and when she saw Julian and Harper, her expression changed. Well, Catherine said loudly, her voice dripping with fake sweetness, isn't this cozy? The help has certainly moved up in the world. The restaurant went quiet. Harper's face burned with embarrassment. She tried to pull her hand away, but Julian held it firmly. Victoria, he said calmly, you're looking well. How's the yoga instructor? Catherine's jaw tightened, and she turned away without another word. I'm sorry, Julian said softly to Harper. It's fine, Harper lied. No, it's not, Julian said. But we're not leaving. We have every right to be here. Harper smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest. For the first time in a long time, someone was standing up for her. The next morning, Harper woke up to her phone buzzing. A news article was spreading everywhere. Tech billionaire Julian Richardson dating his housekeeper? The article included a photo of Julian kissing her hand at the restaurant. Words like scandal and gold digger were everywhere. Her phone buzzed again. A text from Julian. Don't read the comments. I'm coming over. No, Harper typed back quickly. I have work. Minutes later, there was a knock at her door. Julian stood there dressed in a sharp suit, despite the early hour. You're not going to work today, he said, stepping inside. We need to talk strategy. Strategy? Harper laughed, though there was no humor in it. Julian, I clean houses. I can't strategy my way out of this. You don't have to, Julian said. What if you didn't clean houses anymore? What are you talking about? Julian opened a leather briefcase and pulled out some papers. My company has a foundation, he said. We give grants to help people go back to school or start businesses. You could use one to focus on your designs. Harper stared at the papers. No, she said, stepping back. I won't be your charity case. Julian frowned. It's not charity, Harper. It's an opportunity. I said no. Harper's voice was firm, even though her heart was pounding. The rain outside kept falling, but Harper felt like the storm was inside her now. What would she do? Could she trust Julian? Could she trust herself? The questions swirled in her mind, but one thing was clear. Her life would never be the same. Julian's face softened. Harper, don't you see? This is what they want. They want to make you look bad. A poor housekeeper trying to get ahead by being with me. I won't let them have that satisfaction. Harper frowned. Then what do you want me to do? Keep cleaning houses forever while hiding from cameras? Pretend the sketches I drew don't matter because I'm scared of what people might say? Don't, she held up her hand. Don't act like it's that simple. You live in a world where money fixes everything. I live in a world where things aren't that easy. Julian's voice grew quiet. Your world is like a cage you've locked yourself in. His words stung, and Harper turned away, blinking back tears. Through her apartment window, she saw a photographer setting up a camera across the street. News traveled fast. I have clients who need me, she said softly. Real people, not big companies. Mrs. Martinez just had hip surgery. She can't clean her house. The Cohens both work full-time and have 3 kids. They need my help. Julian stepped closer. He didn't touch her, but she could feel him near. Harper, right now, you need to think about what you want. Not what's easy or expected. What do you want? Her voice cracked. I want to not feel so scared all the time. Scared of bills, of failing, of never being good enough. Then let me help, he said gently. Not as charity, but as an investment. Show me your designs. Make a business plan. Convince me that you're worth it. I already believe in you, Harper. Do you believe in yourself? Before she could answer, their phones chimed. Harper looked at hers, and her stomach sank. The headline read, "Ex-wife of Julian Richardson claims inappropriate relationship with staff." Julian muttered something under his breath, clearly annoyed. "I need to deal with this," he said. "But Harper," he tilted her chin so she'd look at him. "Whatever Victoria said, remember, she left because she couldn't handle not being the center of my life. Don't let her opinion change what you do." "That's easy for you to say," Harper whispered. "Your whole life won't fall apart if this goes badly." "Won't it?" Julian's thumb brushed her cheek. "I can't focus on anything since I met you. My board questions my decisions. My ex-wife is trying to ruin me, and yet all I care about is making you see yourself the way I see you." "And how's that?" Harper asked. "Like a masterpiece waiting to shine, like someone hiding their true talent because they're scared, like the most amazing person I've met in years who's too busy cleaning my trophies to win their own." Harper's phone buzzed again. It was her friend Sophie, probably reacting to the news. Then Julian's phone rang, his assistant calling. The real world was crashing in. "I have to go," Julian said, reluctant, "but promise me you'll think about this, the foundation, your business plan, all of it." He squeezed her hand. "And Harper, take the day off. Draw something. Remember who you are." After he left, Harper stared out the window at the photographers below. Her phone kept buzzing, messages from friends, clients, even numbers she didn't know. She looked at her wall where her old sketches hung. One drawing caught her eye, a dress inspired by sunlight breaking through a prism with colors like coral, gold, and purple. Slowly, she pulled an old sketchbook from her closet. The pages were worn, filled with dreams she'd locked away. She opened to a blank page, grabbed a pencil, and began to draw. Outside, the cameras waited for drama. But inside, for the first time in years, Harper let herself dream. A few days later, Harper sat in the boardroom of Richardson Tech. The room felt cold and serious, and 12 important people stared at her. They looked like judges. Harper adjusted her borrowed blazer, a fancy brand her friend Sophie had found for her. She tried to act confident. "So," said Howard Chen, the chairman with silver hair, "you want us to give foundation money to a fashion business run by a housekeeper? In this economy?" "She's a former housekeeper," Julian corrected from the head of the table. "And yes, I do, if the board approves her business plan." In front of each board member was Harper's proposal. It included her designs, clothes that were stylish but practical. She'd stayed up 3 nights putting everything together: market research, costs, and her vision for making fashion that women could afford. Patricia Whitmore, the only woman on the board, adjusted her glasses. "Your designs are interesting, but fashion is a tough industry. Why do you think you'll succeed where so many fail?" Harper took a deep breath. Because I understand both sides," she said. "I've cleaned houses for women who buy expensive designer clothes. I've also been the woman who couldn't afford them. My designs bridge that gap, luxury ideas at affordable prices." James Morrison, another board member, raised an eyebrow. "And the fact that you're dating Julian Richardson has nothing to do with this?" Julian's voice turned sharp. "That's enough." "No, it's a fair question," Harper said, meeting Morrison's gaze. "Mr. Richardson's foundation supports startups with good ideas. If my relationship with him makes you uncomfortable, I'll find funding elsewhere. My plan doesn't depend on him." That wasn't true. She needed the foundation's help. But these people respected confidence, not desperation. Howard Chen spoke up. "Maybe we should discuss this without Miss Hayes present." Harper nodded, gathering her things. At the door, Julian touched her elbow. "Wait in my office," he murmured. The next 45 minutes felt like forever. Harper paced Julian's office, looking out at the city through the huge windows. Her phone buzzed. It was Sophie, sending cheerful emojis. Then another message came, from an unknown number. It read, "I know your secret. Back off, or everyone will learn the truth about your mother's medical bills." Harper's blood ran cold. The door opened, and Julian walked in. His face gave nothing away. "Well?" Harper asked, trying to sound calm. They approved it, he said, smiling. With conditions. You'll get funding, but you need to meet certain goals every few months. Also, he hesitated, they want us to keep our relationship private for now. Harper laughed bitterly. The tabloids won't just forget about us. We'll manage the press, Julian said. Then he noticed her pale face. What's wrong? Wordlessly, Harper showed him the message. Julian's jaw clenched. I'll handle her. How? She knows about my mom's bills. Someone is feeding her information. Julian sighed, running a hand through his hair. I'm sorry, Harper. I never wanted you caught in this mess. I'm not scared of Victoria, Harper said, surprising herself. I'm scared of failing. Failing you, the board, everyone. Julian took her hands. The only way you could fail me is by giving up. We'll figure this out. Harper's phone buzzed again, another message from Victoria, but Harper ignored it. Dinner sounds good, she said. Let's celebrate. Because for the first time in a long time, Harper wasn't just afraid. She was ready to fight for her dream. Harper could almost picture the future, clear as day. It was bright, a little scary, and absolutely worth fighting for. Even if it meant standing up to Victoria Richardson herself, Harper knew she couldn't back down now. The delicious scent of garlic and rosemary filled Julian's kitchen as Harper perched on a bar stool, watching him move gracefully between shiny copper pots. It surprised her how naturally he seemed to handle the tasks of cooking. Soft classical music played in the background, Chopin nocturnes. Harper recognized the melody from late nights when she'd stayed up working. You can actually cook, she teased with a small smile, leaning her chin on her hand. I thought you were bluffing this whole time. Julian grinned as he drizzled olive oil over a tray of vegetables, making them glisten. Mom insisted all her kids learn to cook. She said being rich was no excuse for being useless in the kitchen. He glanced up at her with a playful smirk. Of course, Victoria hated that I could cook better than her. Harper's smile faded at the mention of Victoria. Victoria hated a lot of things, she murmured before she could stop herself. Julian paused, his hands still over the cutting board. His voice grew quieter. You saw parts of her I never did, didn't you? Back when you worked for her? Harper thought about brushing off the question, but there was something in his tone that made her stop. She decided to be honest instead. She was unhappy. Even before everything fell apart, she'd spend hours reorganizing rooms I'd just cleaned, like she was trying to control something, anything. Harper hesitated, twirling the stem of her wine glass. Sometimes when you were away, she'd try on her wedding dress. She'd just stand in front of the mirror, crying. Julian stilled, the knife he'd been holding now, sitting on the counter. His voice was barely above a whisper. I didn't know. Sometimes I wonder if I ever really knew her at all. He paused, looking up at Harper. Is that why you kissed me that day? Because I reminded you of her? The question hit her harder than she expected. It had been haunting her for weeks, ever since the moment it happened. She opened her mouth to reply, but before she could, Julian took a step closer. No, he said firmly, cutting through her doubts. I kissed you because, for a moment, I thought I was dreaming. Not because you reminded me of Victoria, but because you reminded me of everything I'd been missing. Someone real. Someone who sees the world in color and possibilities instead of numbers and profit margins. He reached out and cupped her cheek gently. Harper leaned into his touch, her heart beating faster. For the first time in weeks, she felt like everything might actually be okay. Then her phone buzzed on the counter, shattering the moment. Harper sighed and reached for it, but as soon as she saw the screen, her face fell. Victoria? Julian guessed, noticing her expression. No, Harper muttered, turning the screen toward him. It was a tabloid headline from TMZ. TMZ exclusive. Sources reveal Richardson tech CEO's new girlfriend's dark past. Medical fraud investigation. Julian grabbed his phone immediately. I'm calling my lawyers. They'll put an end to this. Wait, Harper said, reaching out to stop him. Her voice was uncertain. Maybe we should cool things off, just for a little while, until the collection launches. Give people time to forget. Before Julian could respond, the doorbell rang. I'm not expecting anyone, he said, frowning as he wiped his hands on a towel. Harper's stomach dropped. She recognized the faint hint of perfume that had drifted in, a scent she'd smelled far too often in the past. It was unmistakable. Chanel number 5. Victoria. Julian opened the door, his expression hardening as soon as he saw her. You can't just show up here, Victoria. Can't I? Victoria replied sweetly, sweeping past him into the house. It's still legally my house, too, for the next 6 months anyway. She entered the kitchen with the confidence of someone who still believed they owned the place. Her sharp heels clicked on the marble floor as she scanned the room, her eyes landing on Harper. How cozy, Victoria said with a smirk, her voice dripping with mockery. Playing house already? Tell me, does she do the dishes after cooking, or is that beneath her new station? Harper's voice was calm but firm. Actually, Julian cooked. For a brief moment, something flickered in Victoria's eyes, something that almost looked like pain. But just as quickly, her expression turned sharp again. Of course he did, she said, laughing lightly. Julian always did love playing the White Knight. Tell me, Harper, has he promised to save you yet? Invest in your little dreams? That's enough, Julian said, his voice like steel. Why are you here, Victoria? Victoria's smile grew razor sharp. She pulled out her phone and held it up, displaying a series of documents. Your mother's medical bills, Harper. The experimental treatments. They weren't exactly legal, were they? Harper felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. How did you? Money finds answers, Victoria interrupted smoothly. The question is, what are you willing to pay to keep those answers quiet? Name it, Julian said without hesitation, stepping forward. Whatever you want. Just leave Harper out of this. Victoria laughed, the sound cold and musical. Oh, darling, I don't want your money. I want her gone. No relationship, no investment, no fashion line, just gone. Harper's hands trembled. She thought of her mother, weak from chemo, signing papers she barely understood, anything to give her daughters more time. If I walk away now, Harper said slowly, her voice shaking, you'll keep quiet about my mother? Victoria's smile widened. You have my word. Harper looked around the kitchen at the half-prepared meal, the wine glasses, the life she'd begun to imagine for herself. Then she looked at Julian, his face filled with worry and desperation. You're right about one thing, Harper said quietly. I am my mother's daughter. Victoria's smile faltered. What's that supposed to mean? It means she taught me that love is worth fighting for. Harper stepped closer to Julian and took his hand. No, Victoria, I won't walk away. Post whatever you want. The truth is, my mother broke the rules to save my life. I'm not ashamed of that. You'll regret this, Victoria hissed, her voice sharp as a knife. No, Julian said, his tone calm but firm. The only thing I regret is not seeing you clearly years ago. Now get out of our house. Victoria stormed out, her heels clicking loudly on the marble floors. When the door slammed shut, Harper's knees gave out. Julian was there in an instant, catching her and holding her close. I'm so sorry, he whispered into her hair. Don't be, Harper said softly, breathing in the scent of him. Spices from cooking, his cologne, and something that was just him. For the first time in my life, I'm not running from hard things. That's worth whatever happens next. In the kitchen, the vegetables started to burn, but neither of them moved. Harper realized that sometimes you had to let old things burn to make space for something new. 3 months later, Harper sat in a brightly lit TV studio, dressed in one of her own designs. The deep blue dress was sleek and powerful, making her feel invincible. The host, Ava Sullivan, leaned forward. So Victoria Richardson threatened to expose your mother's story. Were you ashamed? Harper smiled calmly. No, my mother did what she had to do to survive for her daughters. Love doesn't always follow the rules, and I'm not ashamed of that. Ava smiled back. And neither does fashion from what I hear. Harper laughed. Exactly. My collection, Rewritten, is about second chances. Every piece is designed for women rewriting their own stories. After the interview, Julian was waiting for her backstage, grinning. You were amazing, he said, pulling her into a hug. Though I think you gave the PR team a bit of a heart attack with that love and rule-breaking speech. Harper laughed. How was your board meeting? Julian's smile faded slightly. We should talk. They rode back to his office in silence. Harper's mind raced with worries. Had Victoria finally convinced the board to pull their investment? When they arrived, Julian turned to her, his expression soft. The board voted today on Rewritten. Harper's heart sank. They're pulling out, aren't they? No, Julian said, smiling. They're doubling down. Full support, expanded budget, everything. They believe in you, Harper. Tears welled up in her eyes. Really? Really? Julian said, but then he hesitated. There's one catch. Harper's smile wavered. What is it? They want me to step back from the project to avoid any appearance of favoritism. Harper frowned. But the foundation is your passion. Julian reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Not anymore. Inside was a ring with a pink sapphire, delicate and unique, just like her designs. Victoria was right about one thing, Julian said, dropping to one knee. I love being a hero, but you don't need saving. You just need someone who believes in you as much as you believe in others. Harper Hayes, will you marry me? Harper looked at him, her heart full to bursting. Yes. Harper's team was probably busy fixing all the final details for the big launch. Her phone was like buzzing with calls and messages about interviews, contracts, and the endless little tasks that came with creating something new. But right now, none of that mattered. Only one thing did. Yes, Harper whispered with a smile. Then she laughed as Julian slipped the ring onto her finger. Yes, she repeated, but on one condition. Still kneeling, Julian raised an eyebrow. Name it. I'm designing my own wedding dress this time. Julian stood up, pulling her into a kiss that felt like the beginning of something beautiful. I wouldn't want it any other way. Later that night, they toasted with champagne on the balcony. The city sparkled below them like a sea of stars. Harper's phone buzzed, and she expected it to be another work alert. But when she checked, it was an email from someone she hadn't heard from in a long time. The email read, Harper, I watched your interview today. You have something I never did, the courage to be yourself, even when it's hard. Take care of him, and congratulations on the new collection, Catherine. Harper showed the email to Julian. He read it twice, then pulled her close. You know what this means, he said. That Victoria's finally moving on? Harper guessed. That, Julian said with a grin, and that we need to start planning a wedding worthy of a dress you haven't designed yet. Harper laughed, leaning into him as the lights twinkled around them. Julian was right. Their story wasn't over. It was just beginning. Working on your own wedding dress at midnight is bad luck, Sophie said, carefully adjusting a pin in the shiny fabric. It might also mean you're a little crazy. Harper stepped back from the dress form, stretching her arms. She had been working for hours. Her dress stood in the middle of her studio like a magical dream come to life. The hand-painted silk was soft and colorful, flowing beautifully from the top. It wasn't white like most wedding dresses, but Harper wasn't like most brides. I have a fashion show in 3 days, Harper reminded her sister. If I don't finish this tonight, it'll be a disaster. Sophie pulled her to sit by the window. Your designs are already famous. The dress will be perfect. Everything will be perfect. Through the window, the city's bright lights sparkled against the dark sky. It had been a year since Victoria had tried to scare her away. A year since Harper decided to fight for what she believed in. She had spent that year building something amazing. Harper's phone buzzed with a text from Julian. Coming up. I've got reinforcements. Minutes later, the door opened. Julian walked in carrying coffee in a familiar garment bag. Behind him was someone Harper didn't expect, Victoria. Harper stood up, surprised. I didn't think you'd come. Neither did I, Victoria said. She looked different, softer, in jeans and a cozy sweater, but Julian said you wanted my opinion on your dress. She held up the garment bag. I brought something that might help. Inside was Victoria's old wedding dress, the dress that had started all their drama. Harper touched it, remembering how it had felt that day. I thought you kept it, Harper said. I was going to, Victoria admitted, stepping closer to Harper's new dress. But some things deserve a fresh start. She ran her fingers over the painted silk. This is incredible. It's like you made the building come alive and dance. That's what I said, Sophie chimed in proudly. Well, not in fancy words. I just said it looks like ballet dancers built skyscrapers. Julian walked over and hugged Harper from behind. Remind me why we're all here at midnight. Because your fiancé is a perfectionist, Sophie answered, and she won't stop until every detail is just right. Even though she has a huge fashion show in 3 days, Victoria added, smirking, and a wedding half of New York is trying to attend. Half? Sophie laughed. More like 3/4, Victoria corrected. The newspapers are calling it the wedding of the year. She paused, then smiled kindly at Harper. They're not wrong. You've earned this, Harper, all of it. Tears filled Harper's eyes, but she blamed the late hour. I have something to show you, she said, pulling out a sketch she'd been saving. It's for next season's collection. I'd love your opinion, Victoria. The sketch showed a fancy pantsuit that could transform into a flowing evening gown. Victoria studied it, her face lighting up with interest. How does the transformation work? Soon, they were deep in discussion, with Sophie adding surprising ideas about how to make it easier to wear. Julian sat back, watching with a smile. Only you, he whispered to Harper, could turn fashion into family therapy. Harper smiled back. Speaking of family, she said softly, guiding his hand to her stomach. I haven't told anyone else yet, but his eyes widened. Really? Really, she said, grinning. Julian kissed her, and it tasted like happiness and endless possibilities. Across the room, Sophie whistled loudly. Save it for the honeymoon, she teased. We have work to do. Harper turned back to her dress. The top part reminded her of who she used to be, structured and careful, but the bottom with its flowing colors showed who she had become, bold and free. Thank you, Victoria said softly, standing beside her. For what? For showing Julian how to love without fixing everything, for teaching me that letting go isn't the same as giving up. By the time the dress was finished, the sun was rising. It stood tall and beautiful, a symbol of second chances and big dreams. It's perfect, Sophie said, hugging Harper. Better, Harper said, leaning into Julian. It's real. As the sun painted the sky in colors Harper couldn't have imagined, she realized something. I'm home, she said, meaning it with her whole heart. And for the first time in her life, she truly was. Thank you for watching. If you like this story and want to see more, please subscribe to our channel. That way you won't miss any new videos. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and share what you think in the comments. We love hearing your thoughts. Also, don't forget to check out the other videos on our channel. We'll see you in the next story.